Welcome to the Hands Up If You're Human podcast. This podcast is dedicated to creating lives of fulfillment, meaning, and joy by exploring what it means to be all that we are. From our innate gifts and the things we've been taught to think of as our flaws to our deepest desires and needs that we are shamed for, we want to explore all the complexities that come as a package deal simply by being human. Recognizing and accepting our true selves empowers us to authentically show up in all aspects of our life. And the world needs more than ever more acceptance and authenticity. Hello, Wyndham.
Hello, Lisa. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. If still a bit orange for some reason.
It's fine. You look good. You look good to me.
Thank you.
So we are on our 4th episode.
Yep.
We have been asked to discuss boundaries and balance.
We have.
And we've explored it twice now together.
We have. Yeah.
Which is interesting. So we've had a go at trying to talk this through once before, and we felt that we actually didn't have boundaries around the topic of boundaries, which is quite interesting in itself.
Yeah.
It's given us a lot of reflection time, and we've taken the time to go back and look at where does it show up in our lives, and can there be there's different categories that it shows up in different ways for different reasons.
Yeah.
So we'll start with, what is your take on boundaries? And what I mean by that is, firstly, where does it show up most for you?
Yeah, interesting one. I think so. Since we've been thinking a bit more about this, I've checked out a couple of quotes and kind of ideas around what they are, and a couple of them have resonated. And the one that kind of has stood out is simply about, what are boundaries? And this quote is, boundaries are, in simple terms, the recognition of personal space. Now, space might be too limited, but I think boundaries are the recognition of personal need. And so where we have strong, well-established boundaries, we have time and space to be in service to our own needs. You don't typically have big conversations about how strongly people impose their boundaries. Typically, we're talking about absence of boundaries. And so if a boundary is, in simple terms, the recognition of personal need, then the problem is where we are not putting in sufficient protection, and our personal needs are discarded in favor of, or in precedence to, other people's needs. Does that make sense?
It does make absolutely, to me, it makes sense. So I guess I have recognized that it's actually, like you said, it's the lack of boundaries that is really obvious when you start to reflect on it. It's the first thing that you go to.
Yeah.
And therefore it means that you're leaking time, energy, emotion if you haven't got those boundaries. And I guess it's like, why do we do that? Why do we not have those boundaries? Where does that come from in the first place?
Yeah. I have a take on that. Do you?
Go on then. Yeah, no, you go first.
So I genuinely think it's all down to our ancient brain. It's all down to this idea of we crave safety. And so if you take our ancient brain, it was like, well, if we're not included in this group, we will be ejected and some animal is going to come and eat us. So our survival is dependent on being included in groups. And I talk a lot about inclusion criteria. And I think there's a couple of things at play, regardless of the environment in which we end up lacking boundaries. I think one is the inclusion criteria. So what are we being exposed to as expected behaviors that we need to conform to in order to remain included? And then the other part of it is, so that is true of all relationships, professional relationships, personal relationships, social relationships, all of that stuff. We have these inclusion criteria. They're either explicit, implied, or assumed. Problematically, there's a fourth, which is inconsistent. But we have these things that we think we have to do, or we're told we have to do to remain included. And then on this, so that's potentially external. On the internal side, we want to be included. We want people to like us. We want, when you meet somebody that you're attracted to, we want them to think the best of us, so we don't show ourselves, our full selves. Nobody goes into a first meeting with somebody and kind of goes, by the way, I have a very strict boundary. You're not allowed to call me at this time. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. And this is what, we don't do that. So by the time we're in these relationships, whether they be professional, personal, whatever they might be, we're setting a false standard. We're setting a standard and teaching people what we will accept that is not fully tending our own needs. And we keep doing that until we're exhausted and we break down. At which point we have to kind of retrain people that all the things that we told them will be okay are not. And it's fantastically difficult.
Yeah. And I can relate to that mostly in relationships. You know, it's
personal, non-professional
like in terms of like marriage, or, you know, long-term relationships, love relationships. It's that, I mean, there's a honeymoon period for a reason, right? They say that. And yet we change anyway, especially if we're in a long-term relationship, and our boundary settings become, for one, we become more aware that we're not meeting our own needs because we've tried to fit in and we've tried to be what we want that person to be. And then it's like you said, it's, they then assume that that is you, and vice versa. And then you start going, hang on a second, no, I don't want to do this anymore. No, this isn't cool. I need you, you know, I don't like the fact that you come in this late, or that you prioritize other people over me, or whatever that is. And then it becomes conflict. And then that conflict becomes uncomfortable. And I think we've talked about it before. You said to me, like, how would you know when you haven't set a boundary? Or, you know, it's that fear of, well, for one, I get resentful that people don't recognize that my needs have changed. Actually, my needs haven't changed, like you said.
Yeah.
They were always there. I just hadn't honored them.
Yeah.
And then it's like the fear of rejection because of their response to that. And then having to be really okay with that horrible, awkward feeling that you get when they're not accepting your new boundary.
Yeah. There's it's really interesting. It takes me to the second quote I found, which is from the ever wonderful Brené Brown, and her The Gifts of Imperfection. And she says, when we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, which is an interesting point we should touch on, accountability. When we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we feel used and mistreated. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing a behavior or a choice. Really interesting, that whole kind of, because we are actually, I think, often not super clear about the deeper need of ours, we focus on the really annoying behavior that we find frustrating. It's almost like the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's like the problem is not that I throw my wet towel on the floor. I don't, by the way. I just want to make crystal clear, I don't. But if it's like every time I come home, I find your wet towel on the floor, mind blows, massive argument. Why are you so inconsiderate? And it isn't about the towel. It's about something deeper. The towel is just kind of like the point, the trigger point for the conversation. And the challenge is why are you inconsiderate? As opposed to why in this moment are you behaving in an inconsiderate way? We make it about the person completely rather than the incident itself. It kind of feels like we're getting into solving the problem already, but it's a really interesting one, and the fact we've spoken a couple of times about it, I think, has been really helpful.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And I mean, my biggest challenge because I am a mum of 3 kids, is with children, is like you saying about like, I mean, the amount of parents that might hopefully will listen to this podcast is like, it is a constant battle of pick that up, do this, do that, whatever. Now we can, I know me and my husband, sometimes we just, for an easy life, you just do it and you start doing it and doing it. So then they expect you to do it because they know you're going to do it. So they don't really want to pick up the towel on the floor or empty the dishwasher or whatever it is. But actually then it blows up. And actually you're right, I then become very personal about my kids. Like, they're lazy, they're selfish, you know, how dare they resent it, like they're disrespectful, the resentment comes in, and actually if we've been really strict with our boundary from the get-go, this is the way it is, and you know, there's no wiggle room with it for a reason. And we said this before, because it needs to be rigid in place to start off with, regardless if it's with kids or it's with wherever you need to set those boundaries. But interestingly, this morning, I'm just about to do my weekend retreat, my yoga retreat. So I'm really stretched for time. All of a sudden, all the things that I allow, especially the little one who's only 8, to get away with every single morning, I am then going, tidy up your toys. Have you got this done? Today. Have you got, like, because I'm overwhelmed. It's my problem. It's not theirs.
Yeah.
Those boundaries haven't been there for weeks because I've let it slide, because it was just easier just to do those things. And then all of a sudden I'm imposing that on an 8-year-old boy on a Wednesday morning.
And expecting instant compliance with the new boundary.
Absolutely.
What I find really fascinating, and I think this is where some of this stuff diverges when it's from a familial parental role and a professional role, is the boundaries are more blurred for you as a primary caregiver. Because if you think back to that Brené Brown quote, she was talking about accountability. And when I work with my clients, I have a framework I work with, one component of which is ownership. So to create the life we really want, we have to own everything that is truly ours to own. And vital importance is putting down all those things we carry that are not ours to own. And that's the imposition of boundaries, or the setting of boundaries. If you think from a parental perspective, the accountability is different, right? Because, you know, your son is 8. There are certain things you are 100% accountable for. His well-being, his health. If he's sick, he can't take himself to see a doctor. You are responsible for that. And then there are the things which are like, well, actually, I'm going to teach him life skills and I'm going to help him grow into a complete human being. The line that is blurred, because you are doing more for him than a boss would be doing for their employee. When you get into the world of work, it's like, these are the parameters of your job. Deliver your job. And then it's like, well, where we don't have boundaries at work is typically over delivering, staying too long, doing all those kind of things. But I think there's a different kind of background to it, that recognizing the hat we're wearing in any moment, is it parental, is it work, is it societal, is it social, is it friends, whatever it might be, and really being clear on what is my responsibility in this moment, what is mine to own and what is theirs to own, is much harder in a home environment. Harder? Don't know, that might be controversial.
Yeah, well, but also it changes as the children grow older. So what is okay for the boundary setting for an 8-year-old, for the 18-year-old, again, you are constantly changing, having to change that boundary, because you're like, they are more aware, they have got more they can be more responsible, they can do more things. It is teaching life lessons. There are boundaries for a reason. And for one, it keeps them safe. It's not, I've had a conversation. I remember when my stepdaughter she's probably 14, and it was the first time she wanted to go on the ferry across to near where we live, these shops. And her dad was away, and it was typical that, like, it was this big thing that I was working that night, and I was like, right, well, you have to be back at this time. Like, there's no, you've got to be back at this time. And she didn't come back, but it was the first time she'd gone out. And I was absolutely, and it was, I remember it so well because I couldn't believe she didn't stick to a very simple instruction. And yet it was, so when we finally had a conversation about it, where once the emotion and the how dare you, and it wasn't my fault, and we had to stop off for my friend, and that's why I'm late, and I wanted to stay with them all, I didn't want to be on my own, whatever the narrative was that she told me, the next day, once the emotions had cleared, it was like, I did that. If I didn't care about you, I would have let you come in at midnight. The fact is because I care, and it's because it keeps you safe, is why those boundaries were in place.
Yeah.
And then it changes again. And then now, like, you know, they go to being 18 and they go out at night, and it's like, then you have to let the boundaries go a bit, going, well, now it's time for you to figure that out on your own, and, you know, and let go of that parental side of it. So it's very, very different with work. My experience with work is, especially being self-employed, is when I want to level up, when I want to put my prices up, for example, when I'm valuing that I've got more expertise in my field, and setting that boundary and changing that, you know, either using it's a new tax year, but actually I don't use that. And then being, right, well, this is my new pricing, or whatever it is. This is an example. This is my new pricing. But with this squirmy, horrible feeling that I might be rejected for that now because I've changed that, but still staying like, but no, I've actually been given, you know, more of my time for, I think I'm more value to what I've been doing previously. That's when I challenge that. For me, that is what happens in my work life. And again, regarding offering sessions, you know, really it's an hour session, either my yoga, my coaching, any healing. Yeah, I always go over that time. So therefore, now I know that those clients, those people that come to me, those students, are knowing that I'm going to go over that time.
Yeah. And if you were then to stick to the hour, they're going, this is rubbish. I'm only getting 2/3 of what I used to get, even though they were getting a 50% free, essentially.
Yeah, but I was the one that allowed that to happen. You know, so it's not their fault. So now I feel like, you know, and I'm still in that bit right now. I've got to kind of stay with what I've been offering, because I have been offering that, or I have to have that uncomfortable conversation.
So that's the thing, isn't it? Do you stick with where you are when the weight of you not honoring your needs comes bearing down because of the stories you tell yourself around, well, they're going to reject me, they're going to judge me, what are they going to say to their friends? They're going to go, oh, that Lisa's up herself, she's just jacked her prices up and she kicked me out early. Or do you honor that personal need and go, I'm going to have uncomfortable conversations and be okay with whatever the outcome is, because they may still go, not interested anymore.
Yeah. But there's also, you know, as I'm saying that, and some of the people will be listening to this, that I do offer those one-to-ones. I
pay more. Pay what you owe.
No.
I'm joking.
It's more about like, I like to not be rushed. Like you know, my life is like, I don't like too much structure, actually. And
okay, so sorry to interrupt, but this is really interesting, because it's, at what point is it becoming an unacceptable lack of a boundary for you? And what's the difference between that and saying, actually, I'm more than comfortable, I say an hour, but I'm more than happy running an hour and a quarter or an hour 20 or whatever it might be? What's the difference? How do we know we're at that point where it's like, can't do this anymore?
Yeah. Interesting how to respond to that. Well, I think it's when it's like it's a value of mine. Like my value is that I want to really give that person my time, and because it's coming from a place of, I know this is being supportive to them. I don't want to go, right, that's it, the hour's done. We're right in the middle of a really important, maybe aha moment or whatever it is for that person, or you know, they have an emotional release, for example, and then I go, right, that's it, the session's finished. I am human, they are human. I want there to be that humanness and that kind of nurturing. So that's important to me. And being naturally a nurturing, caring person, that is one of my, this is innate within me that I want to continue doing. So it's not a problem. It is, okay. I think, if it's yeah, I think but yeah, it's probably more I was quite interested even talking about it, because as I've said it, I'm going, it's not actually an issue for me. Issue me. I think it's more the fact that people in the coaching world are the people like yourself and other people, when we were doing our training or we do any kind of reflection time, it's like, when are you being taken advantage of because you're allowing that someone's take advantage of you? When is it that you're being a people pleaser because you've chosen to be a people pleaser over the fact that you're a really giving person and it's really important to you that you give, and it doesn't matter about time to a certain level?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's back to that Brené quote about feel used and mistreated. If there is a feeling of reciprocity, reciprocity is a word, right? Reciprocal. That suddenly I'm 99.9% certain it's the right word, but suddenly it sounds completely wrong. If there is a reciprocity, it's the word. I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
If there is that in a relationship, then that we don't feel, or we're less likely to feel used or mistreated. It's almost when we feel this is all one way, and it is slightly different where there's, actually, maybe it isn't different if there's a professional. So you're talking about providing services in exchange for money, right? That's how businesses work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing where if you're giving masses and masses and masses of more free value, then that could become, well, I feel a bit used and mistreated, even though that's from your own place to give or not. If you take it into relationships, personal relationships, either familial, those intimate partner relationships, friendship relationships, it's when the relationship always feels one-sided. When it's somebody is coming to me specifically when they have something they want or need, they take what I am willing to give, and then I'm getting nothing back. And that generates that feeling of being used and mistreated, resentment. And then the question is, what do you do about that?
Yeah. And it's then being okay with the outcome of, if you do decide to say enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
It's I've been there where it's been really make or break, because there is a boundary that I've now set because I've changed. I've recognized it doesn't work for me. It's caused conflict after conflict after conflict. And it's like, I can't go back to not knowing that that's what I've been doing all that time. So there's growth in the way that I am in general. There is, especially being coaches and doing what we do, and the reason why we are where we are is because we're always trying to become the best version of ourselves, or come back to the best version of ourselves, and unravel what our life has been like, or why we've been behaving in a certain way. And when you've had that kind of like awakening of, oh God, this does not work for me, then you change it, and then the other person is like, what the is going on? And it can either be with real resistance, that it's again more conflict because they are then under attack, because it's like, feels like an attack on them, even though you might be really coming from like, no, I know this is because this is my need. And you've got to be let go of what will come from that, because it's not our response. It's not my responsibility to manage however that person reacts or responds.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, because, like I think I said at the beginning, we set the expectations of how we will each be in a relationship, like a one-to-one relationship. Those expectations are set either collectively or potentially from a parent-child perspective, a lot of that is imposed, typically by the parent on the child. And then when one of those people goes, actually, you know what? I have recognized this isn't working for me. If we don't figure out why it's not working, what need of ours is not being served, then what do we do? We don't know what gap we're trying to fill or what space we're trying to protect. So understanding what it is we're trying to create, and then, as you say, communicating that stuff's changed and I understand that isn't your choice. This is why, this is what I'm going to do moving forward. There's no guarantee the other person is going to go with that.
No. And also it's so there's two things that I want to discuss from that. Is also the opposite of that, where the person that you meet, boundaries are so rigid because of whatever experience they've gone through before. And therefore it's like, you can be with me, but this is how I am. You've got to like that. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And yet it's not sustainable for whoever went with them in the end. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the barrier. It's a barrier rather than a boundary. It feels like it's armor rather than, and then being okay if you're the other person, that knowing that could possibly, you've got to be like, you've got to take the person for who they are right in that moment. But actually, as we said, we're not always our true selves in that moment, and actually unraveling that comes too. And I've had that experience, my husband had gone through a really, really tricky divorce beforehand. And so he was like, right, I'm not having this happen to me again. This is basically set the rules out without being that specific. It was showing up in behavior. And then it's going, oh, okay, this is a lot. Like, you don't realize it at the time, but actually, we've been together 12 years now, and so much of that is not there anymore. There's residue of it, but it's been like, again, giving people enough time to soften if that's what they need to do as well.
It's really interesting. I think it goes back to that critical question of what are we trying to create. So we've experienced this world without boundaries, or we've felt used and mistreated, and we feel resentment, and we're looking to put in place boundaries that protect us. If we're not crystal clear on what we're trying to create, it's very easy to end up in that I'm just in protection mode rather than nurture mode. So we can put a boundary in place that gives us space and time in any given relationship that we need for whatever reason, whatever it might be. Or we can put barriers up to, well, I'm not going to let anybody hurt me or take advantage of me again. In which case, what we've ended up creating is a very lonely, armor-plated outlook to the world, which achieves our primary intention. Right? The consequence of that is people aren't going to be able to get close enough to hurt us. However, there's always two types of consequence, intended and unintended. And the unintended consequence is nobody ever gets close to me. And is that what I'm trying to create? And I agree. I think it comes in waves and stages and periods of, actually, if I soften here a bit, look at all this amazing stuff that happens as a result. Well, maybe I can soften there. However, when we are first establishing, if we're in that kind of people-pleasing, downtrodden, no boundaries, everybody taking advantage of us, those boundaries, I think, need to be rigid.
Yes.
Because we have to retrain people what we will and won't accept. And like you found with your 8-year-old son, you waver those boundaries. We're human beings. We're geared up to push boundaries, especially kids, but people in general, I think, is one of our kind of innate ancient survival instincts is to take what's on offer. And so if we're looking to establish new boundaries, that discomfort, that squirmy feeling, that, oh my God, they're going to judge me, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. That's part of our process in creating the outcome we really want.
Yeah. rather than putting up with it and having still that resentment that, you know, the needs not being met, because the needs will never be met. But at the same time, you could have just that one conversation that might, however long, feel not very comfortable. But what comes on the other side of that is at least you being absolutely authentically you, and your needs, and being true to your own needs. And even you saying about, you know, with children, it's like, from watching a child grow from being a baby, you know, and as they evolve, is there are phases where you see them do that from a really young age. They're going to all of a sudden they start saying no to you. You go, what? Like, you know, you just said, well, you know, go with whatever mummy said, and all of a sudden, no, I'm not doing that anymore. What do you mean you're not doing that anymore? but because it's instinctively, it's how we are going to survive. And yeah, interesting. And there was another thing that also, I've lost it now, but something else you said then as well that I was like, oh yeah, that I want to look at that further. Anyway, if it's meant to be, it will come back to me. Yes, that was it. So we touched on it before, about when do you become an enabler because you don't set those boundaries. So
interesting. So is it when you're not setting boundaries, or is it where you're overstepping other people's boundaries? So explain to me what you mean by that, by what you said, the enabler piece.
So, for example, people that are in abusive, be it physically or, you know, verbally, emotionally, or are living with an addict or something like that. What I found with people that I know who have been in those situations is that they are part of the problem because they haven't got the voice, or don't feel they have the strength to be able to say, this isn't, no to this isn't, you know, you need to. And with that means that you're enabling that behavior to continue. And it's the same, and it doesn't need to be that extreme. It's the same with again, being a parent. You enable bad behavior because you're too tired, or your focus is somewhere else, and you haven't got the energy for that at that moment. So you then, the example you gave the other day was,
I think I remember what you said. Yeah, so a long time ago, I lived in Australia for a year. That one.
yes.
Yeah. So I lived in Australia for a year. Essentially ran out of money while I was there. Came back to the UK, and because I'd run out of money, I couldn't afford my credit card bill. And I had a conversation with my sister, and I don't think it started with me asking. I don't think it could well have. She may have a different recollection, but she essentially offered to pay not the bill off, but the monthly interest charge. And she agreed. She did that a couple of times. And then I can't remember if it was I can't remember what number month it was, but she had been paying my credit card bill essentially for a short period of time. And I went to her one month and said, I still don't have the money. Could you go again? And I remember it really clearly, even today. We were sat in what used to be the Rat and Parrot on Putney High Street, opposite the railway station. And she looked at me and said, I don't think this is helping you anymore. I don't think you are taking responsibility for your problem. And the more I bail you out, the less you need to. So I'm really sorry. No, I'm not going to pay. And I know that was incredibly difficult for her because she knew there were consequences for me as a result. What it ended up doing, and she was absolutely right. She was 100% right. Whilst I wasn't deliberately not doing stuff to earn money to pay my credit card bill, it was there in the back of my mind as a kind of safety net. And what her action did was force me to phone the bank, forced me to own what was mine to own. My irresponsible spending was not her problem to own, it was mine. And actually, she was absolutely right. There is, and I think this is to partly your point, is when we pick up other people's responsibilities, we disempower them from solving their own problems. And sometimes people will react in a little bit like the way I did and go, oh, cool. All right, this is a problem I don't really want to have to solve. That'd be great. Somebody else solving it is brilliant. But sometimes it's the opposite. And it's like, no, no, fuck off, leave me alone. Give me that, that's mine. I want to deal with this. And yet you're swooping in and attempting to solve a problem that isn't yours to solve. I haven't asked you to solve it. So there are kind of two, or probably more, but at least two types of situation within that empowerment, disempowerment, swooping in, and who's owning what is whose to own. From the credit card perspective, I had a lovely debt collector relationship with a lovely debt collector for nearly a year, and I've not been bad with money since. So
yeah,
short-term discomfort for my sister, it would have been easier from her perspective to swallow that down and pay. She embraced the discomfort she felt in telling me no, and that introduced me to a whole load of discomfort that I learned extremely valuable lessons from, and haven't had that problem since.
Well, it's funny it's funny because I look back at my uni days and when I was in that kind of phase, even after uni, and I've always kind of gone, well, I've been rubbish. I was rubbish with money because my parents always bailed me out if I needed bailing out, and I totally didn't take ownership of that at all for myself. But it's something that I remember thinking, like, for my children, is like, I don't want them not to learn that it's important to take care of money, be mindful of your spending, and expect that, and let go of that expectation that mum and dad are going to be there and going to sort you out if you're, of course we're going to be, but ultimately I don't want that to be a bad behavior or a pattern that's repeated in life because it wasn't addressed earlier, because I think that happens a lot. I have a lot of parents that come to me, like especially mums, and it's a conversation that is happening all the time around this, like 18 to 20 something year olds, because it's a big life lesson to learn. But that's exactly it. If she didn't do that, she'd have enabled that to continue and that become more of a ingrained behavior moving forward in your life.
And actually, from her perspective, it's another burden for her to carry.
And also
she's got her own stuff.
And also, we've talked about, when is it that we overcross our boundaries? Like, that's not her responsibility anyway. So she became quite like a parental role for you at that point. So it blurred her, like, no, she's your sister, you know, like, rather than, and we discussed this before, that when we can do that, we forget that there are times when we do wear certain hats for a reason. And actually, it's difficult. I was thinking about this as somebody who coaches and holds space for people's emotions a lot. It's very natural for me to talk to anybody on that level. However, there are times when it clearly isn't right for me to do that. It's not that role is not there, and so I'm overcrossing boundaries that I shouldn't be crossing. And knowing when that is.
It's really interesting, and I think from you said earlier that you are naturally an open-hearted, giving person. I think that's true for my sister as well. So she's got these two things warring in her head. One being, this is somebody I care about and love very deeply who is in trouble. Can I help them? Yeah, I could help them, and did. And then the other side of it saying, but it isn't your problem. So yes, kind-hearted, giving, caring, wanting to support the people we care about and love. And what is the best way to do that? Because it's not like she was swimming in money. Like, she had less money because she was paying my credit card bill. And I think that's part of the big challenge we have is, you know, right back to the beginning, we teach people how to treat us. We want people to like us, especially if we like them. Then we're going to go the extra mile. We're going to do more. It's when that becomes the norm and isn't recognized, is never commented on, we're never given that kind of, holy crap, Lisa, thank you so much. I recognize you're going above and beyond. You're doing more. And I can't articulate how important that is to me. I thank you so much. It's when none of that stuff is happening actually we're being mistreated, we're being, that builds the resentment.
Yeah, and there's been plenty of times in my life that, with different people, friends, or that has been the case, and they have no idea that you are inside having, every time it happens again, or they're late, or they disrespect you in some way because you've allowed it to happen all these years. But there's sometimes there's that last one that you explode, and they go, what, like, where the heck has this come from? But actually that narrative for me, I can think of one example, had been going on for years, until I finally had that uncomfortable conversation that then was emotionally led, because that's often how everything changes, right? With it doesn't have to be, but that's how we do respond. And then all of a sudden it becomes really dramatic and really overly emotional, and very, rather than, oh, if I'd recognized that beforehand and I was okay with just a day of feeling a bit like, oh, that didn't feel very good, then it would have saved everybody. And again, and then you've got to have the compassion to give that person you've set that boundary with some space to understand it themselves, and kind of either catch up with where you're at and go, okay, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it happens in marriage. For my marriage, quite often, like on both sides, like, oh, been resisting, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my God, I've just got what you're going on about. I am so sorry, or whatever it is. And then you can move on and you evolve in a relationship. But it's because someone has a very clear boundary and a very clear intention, and it's coming because their needs aren't being met.
Yeah. So what happens if you're dealing with someone who you cannot communicate the need for a boundary, or you cannot communicate the impact that not having a boundary has started to have on you, and there is no path to a non-emotional conversation, even though it might be emotional to begin with most people. Over time we can move to a place where, look, that's not helping either, so how do we have this conversation without emotion? What happens if it's a brick wall, or the person is incapable of comprehending what you're saying?
Well, I think that it's either you keep going you hope that the brick wall is going to start to have a few cracks and you start to get through, or it's actually like it's not meant to be. And not, I mean, I guess a really good tangible exercise is to write it down. Do you know what I mean? Like, write it down clearly, so you're very, very clear in terms of it, for a release for yourself, to understand it, to see it factually, take the emotions out of it, even though there might be some emotions in it. But I guess if it's fundamentally that person isn't going to be, cannot hear you, and for whatever reason, because their values are so strong in a different way, then it has to be an acceptance of, then whatever friendship, relationship, or whatever that is clearly not meant to be anymore, because you've either changed, or because they've changed, or because just things are different now.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because if it's a familial relationship, then it's different from friendship, right? There's almost a permanence to a familial relationship. I know not everybody's family relationships, but there's almost that kind of recognition of a boundary being needed, understanding of how receiving of that message somebody's likely to be, giving them the opportunity to surprise us. And then if they don't, it's this idea of, well, what do I do now? Because I'm not going to continue the way I did. And it almost feels like, actually, do we owe people an explanation of when we change boundaries?
Well, no, there doesn't need to be. I think that it'd be, if we have the awareness enough to understand it and be able to articulate it, then yes, definitely say that, and say, this is who I am now because of for whatever reason, whatever reason that you've come to that place. And and own it, and be, it is what it is now. Like, because what's the other thing to do? Go back to what you were like before, which you cannot do. You cannot go backwards. You can keep repeating patterns, but once you've got the awareness and you've changed that pattern, then you can't go back.
Yeah, I think it's one where my personal sense of it is it's always worth trying to communicate.
I agree.
Always. And it is always worth trying to refine our own understanding of what we are trying to achieve and how we feel, which is why we're trying to change things. Really getting clear on that so we can articulate it. Like you said, if you write it down, it helps dissipate the emotion and you're left with actually this is it, right? This is what's happening. This is how it makes me feel. And taking judgment away from it. Right? We said at the beginning that Brené Brown, we tend to attack the person rather than the behavior. And actually, if it's, look, I don't think you're trying to do this to fuck with me. I just think this is what's happening. This is why I am going to impose, I would like this to be how we interact. If that other person can't meet you there, then that's not on you. There are consequences to all of these things, right? And releasing ourselves from the need to control the outcome.
Yeah.
If we can be true to who we are, genuinely true, understand who we are, what we really want, what we're not getting, the other way around, what we're not getting and then what we really want, then we can, I think it's easier to be comfortable with the outcomes we didn't want. So if it's like, I'd love to remain friends with you, this has to change. If they can't accept that, it's like, well, I've been true to myself and this is it.
Yeah. And I know that feeling. And actually instead, and luckily, as of recent times that's happened, it's given that person their opportunity to evolve. Like, not because that's what my outcome, that's what I wanted the outcome to be, because there's a surrender that happens. It's like you know what I mean, when you've got something's changed in you so much, and the boundaries being set or whatever it is, and you're desperately trying to say it from different ways, and you're trying to get someone to understand it, and then you come to that realization going, it's absolutely okay, I get it, I get that you're not there yet, I get that you're not feeling what I feel, that's not important to you, it's important to me, and I respect that you are the way you are, and there is nothing wrong with either of us. You let go of the trying, you create the space. And from my experience, like you said, there's no negative outcome, because if it's the end of a relationship or friendship, then it's the end of it. But more often than not, it's given opportunity for things to go to an even deeper understanding and level for each other.
Yeah, there's a lovely quote my first yoga teacher introduced me to, which was, people can only meet us as far as they have met themselves.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And the reverse is true as well. But I love it that it's that kind of, because we don't get to a place where we're looking to set boundaries without doing a lot of personal work, personal reflection, because we're overcoming people pleasing, we're overcoming, or we're recognizing our worth has been based in external validation. So we go above and beyond to prove to people that we are worthy and we should be included. That takes a lot of personal reflection, a lot of personal work to get to that place where it's like, actually, that is not the indicator of my worth. I'm going to set some boundaries here to protect me and to create what I really want. You can't force people to do the work, and you can't force people to understand where we're coming from.
Well, you're stepping over their boundaries then, aren't you? Like
you're imposing, I'm going to hammer this over your head until you come round to my way of thinking. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And so having that saying, I've never forgotten it. So people can only meet you as far as they've met themselves. That for me is like, okay.
And I think I've felt that in many of my friendships, especially the fact that I am on this path, and I have been for a long time, and I'm always changing. And there's times I'm now with people, and I'm going for walks, which we used to talk and chit chat, and we had common ground, and I'm like, oh, you're not where I am, and that's okay. And there's no judgment, but they are where they are because that's as far as they are right now. And it's not my responsibility to take them up and go, come on, I can, because it's not.
And nor is it your responsibility to dumb yourself down.
No, which is something that was a trait of mine for a long, long time. On all like friendships, showing myself on social media, just being authentically me. I struggled with that in many situations. And we've touched about this before. If we'd known each other 10 years ago, I would have definitely dulled myself down in terms of I would have just talked what you wanted me to talk rather than what was authentic or what was my core beliefs or what my boundaries were. My boundary setting was absolutely shocking. I wanted to be everybody's friend. I want everybody to like me. And it came from a very fearful place of,
and that's
for
really
reasons.
And that's a great example of the inclusion criteria at play. You're assumed either I would behave in a way that you would go, this is an implied inclusion criteria, because I would have had no reservation to dismiss yoga and all that kind of stuff as woo-woo. That's pretty fucking clear what I think. And so you then shape your behavior to remain included in a group that wouldn't have been nourishing, that I didn't want to fucking be, excuse my language, I'll let my language go this one, that I didn't even want to be in. Not really, it wasn't making me happy. It's a fascinating subject.
Yeah. And even like I was speaking to a friend last night who I can talk like this, we do talk like this, and we were saying how he was saying I haven't got many friends that I can speak on this level to. I think there's an importance of not always having to speak this deep and meaningful. I think that there is a place for everybody, and we have friends for a reason. I think you said it, friends for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Like we do. But actually being okay with the fact that your friendship group might change, or your what you job you wanted to do once before is no longer the career you want to follow anymore, moving forward. And because that is okay. Letting that's okay. It's like you said, it's when the boundaries get blurred, because you then want to be friends with everybody, you want to be successful everywhere, you want to be able to look like you can do all the things that now we were being asked to do, rather than going, no, that's not my field of work. No, I don't know how to deal with a bloody website, and I don't want to learn how to do my website, or whatever it is. I'm just saying, because otherwise I think society is trying to make us do so much. Well, not society, it's our responsibility to say no to things, but we are being encouraged to be as fast-paced, quick learning, like how much can we be productive every day. And again, those boundaries then go, there's a point where you either get sick. We talked about this. How do you know when those boundaries are in place? For me, I get sick, I get tired, I get really low energy, and the emotion is resentment. And resentment is, if we were talking any yoga therapy, is closely linked with the liver. Liver is to do with anger. Anger is resent anger. Resentment is resent anger. So it's having a really negative impact on a cellular level in your body.
It's really interesting. It's a really nice almost link into that balance piece. You were saying society, I think it is a societal thing, is driving us to do more, be more productive, master more things. Do you remember when we first went into lockdown, there were all those memes going around, if we're all locked in at home and you come out of lockdown having not learnt a new skill, you've wasted your time.
I didn't see that, but
but I saw it all over the place, and it was like, well, hold on a minute, this is a massive issue, and the psychological damage being done to people is huge. If you get out of lockdown, congratulations. It's that kind of thing. But I think from the balance perspective as well, I think we've been told we can have it all. And I saw a really interesting quote from Jimmy Carr today. And whatever you think of him as a comedian, he was saying that he has a lot of fellow comics who resent the fact that he's playing the stadiums, that he's got the Netflix specials. They want that, but they're not willing to do the decades of work he's done. to refine his craft to the point where that is the outcome. And I think on the balance question is quite often, I think we think of it as equal balance. So all these different parts of our lives should be in equal balance. But if you think of a seesaw, like equal balance, nobody's having any fun. You're just hanging around on a plank. But actually, it's the shift in balance that creates the ride, that creates the excitement, that creates the enjoyment. And actually, if you have 99% of the weight on one end, 1% on the other, and that heavy end is just hovering over the ground, that technically is in balance. And so I think from a balance perspective, it's really important comes back to it again. It's such an important part of what creates a meaningful and fulfilling life is, what are we trying to create?
Yeah. And there's a really corny saying, but it's true, like where your focus where your focus goes, energy flows, right? So we cannot be focusing on everything all the time anyway. And there's going to be times when it's really important to focus on one thing, and then something then has to give. So for example, if you've got a new career, for me right now, it's, this is my big event of the year. So it means that I'm not going to be there present completely with my children and my husband right now, because I cannot do that. This is a very small example of it, but it's a
perfect example.
But it's an example of it. And yet there is this expectation, or if we're not careful and we listen to what is being put out there on social media and how we are being encouraged to be, is like, well, you can do it all, you should be able to do it all. Why can't? Well, and the balance is like you said, meant to be like the pie chart, which I agree. I like that. I don't know if everyone's ever done it, like the life pie chart, where you kind of put everything into sections, and where financial, social, and whatever. I think it's a good checking point from time to time. But of course, there's going to be something that's going to be needing more attention, because it's impossible to keep everything in balance. It's that whole juggling too many things all the time. Impossible. Well, I think it then comes, I say impossible, but I think then it comes down to what is then the most important ones for you.
Yeah, because the only thing I was going to pick you up on there was it's impossible to keep things in balance. I don't think it is. It's recognizing that
it's in balance.
Heavy focus on one thing is still technically in balance.
Yes, I agree.
You cannot, if you're going to spend 8 hours at work, 8 hours asleep, 8 hours at home, is that balance? Could be. But if you're on a really busy project and you're 10 hours at work, 12 hours at work, then you cannot fabricate the same amount of time, effort, and energy for every other part of your life at the same time.
No.
You just can't. So I agree with you. It feels like in this moment, your example of your retreat, in this moment, because it's this weekend, this has to be the primary focus for your time and effort. And by the time you get to Monday, that changes again. The shift on the balance moves, because you don't have to focus on this.
Yeah.
In the same way.
Yeah. And then also as what I think sometimes it's seen negative when we are really out of balance emotionally or whatever, but actually, when do we really look at ourselves? When do we make the big changes? Normally when something feels really, really bad, or something, it's like it feels like it's breaking point. So if you're definitely, like you said, you're still in balance, but you might be like 99, like out of balance, and but you could bring, but that pendulum, then can swing back. But because the person I used to go to and I used to speak to quite a lot, he's now a yoga teacher too, he'd be like, I feel like, if I was emotionally, physically out of whack, he would go to me, Lisa, you need to be reminded of this sometimes to bring yourself back. You need to feel disconnected, feel reconnected. So never to see it as a negative. It's like, oh, okay. So it's the same with the balance. Yeah. Everything's telling you that this is too much now of whatever.
Yeah, that's a great point, because nobody sits there and complains if you're doing 12 hours a day in a job that you love with an end goal in sight and blah, and it's not having an impact on anything else, or that's your primary focus. It's when come back to the resentment. It's when things the out of balance piece is not aligned with who we are and what we're trying to create, or what we really need, or what we really want. So we are out of balance with that potentially, but the focus in our lives is there's, until we fall over and it breaks and we can't do anything, then there is technically a balance. It's being really clear that what we are doing, the focus that directs our energy, is onto something we care about, that is serving a deeper meaning for us.
Well, it's also about being a human being, right?
Absolutely.
Because I mean, in terms of living, being rather than doing, we're always it's like, we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute, but like there is an element of, we can have too much space, that we become lazy, that we don't actually action anything. But actually, where is that like middle ground where it's like, do you know what? I think a lot of people are being asked all this, like, I mean, even anyone who's a mum would know, the school, it's like you need like an admin lady to deal with all the emails that come through with all of that. So we're constantly, every aspect of your life, it's like, or you've got to do, get a new phone, you've got to sort it out, you've got to send it off, you've got to work out this, you've got to do the QR code. It's like, whoa, just when are we just being? When are we allowing just to be still and enjoy life?
Yeah.
Right. We've got to
Good
wrap
question.
it up. Okay. Well, we are delighted if you've listened to this podcast. If you have any feedback or any thoughts on what we've said, we would be more than happy to hear your views. We'd love to hear your views. We are Hands Up If You Are Human podcast. Obviously, that means that the email address is, go on.
Hands up if you're, so we've abbreviated you are. It's hands up if you're human.
I could see your face squirming at me going,
when you said hands up if you are human. No, it's not that.
I know. And I knew I'd said it once I'd said it, sorry.
That's all right, don't apologize.
So please, if you have any questions, any comments, please email us there. You can find us on pretty much, hopefully anywhere you can get a podcast now, but definitely Spotify, Apple, on YouTube. We are delighted if you're enjoying this. If you feel this could be of value to someone else, please share that with those loved ones or friends and colleagues that you feel that would get value from this. And that just leads us to say that, well, thank you first, Wyndham, for another, what feels like a really fab conversation to have. I always learn so much from it. But also we always try and tell you what we're going to do on our next podcast, or what we're going to discuss on our next podcast. And we've actually discussed this before today. We normally give two options, but we've decided we've got to the point now where you're probably thinking, well, why do they feel they've got so much to say on
who the hell are these two people?
So we've reflected and gone, okay, I think it's time to kind of share more about us, our journey, and to this point now, and what we plan or what we hope for the future also from that. But basically just a bit more about us on a personal level and our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can kind of see where we've come from to get to where we are.
Yeah.
I think quite often it's easy to forget the struggles. Even from my perspective, it's long enough ago now that the real pain of it, I can't remember. I can remember there was lots of it. So it would be, I think it'd be helpful just to help everybody get to know us a little bit better.
Yeah. And funny enough, with my journey, it feels like it's been lifetimes in one lifetime. So I'll try and make it as,
it's going to be a 3-hour extravaganza.
No, I hope not. You might be absolutely bullshitless by the end of it, but no, it's it will give more depth to what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Cool.
Lovely. All right. Until next time.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much, everybody.